Well, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you, Harlan. All right, so we're in Parshat Pinchas, and it's this last section here where we read about the statutory offerings. And the last time we met, I discussed exactly how the profound impact that this particular chapter has to this very day, and how it is the foundation of our practice of praying statutory prayers 3 times a day, and what a privilege that really is to be asked to do that. So we just started, and we start off with the Tamid offering. That Tamid means perpetual or eternal, and that was because this offering, a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the afternoon, was brought every single day. Shabbos, Yom Kippur, festivals, didn't matter. It was a daily offering, and we're told that the reason for this offering, because of the way it was offered, it's essentially against sun worship. And I think by sun worship we really are meaning something. We need to get away from just a literal understanding of that. But I would say that it would be sun worship means, because, for example, in Ecclesiastes, we talk about nothing new under the sun, that we're talking about the worship of this physical world, of seeing the physical world as being the ultimate cause and purpose and everything of our lives. So that's actually quite a contemporary issue as well. So this is not to deny or to belittle science by any means, by any means. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Maimonides, the great Maimonides, says that in a way, the better we understand the workings of nature, the more we can have appreciation for the Creator. So I don't see any contradiction. Anyway, going on. So God is giving Moses these instructions regarding the Tamid offering. V'amarta lahem, you shall say to them, Zeh ha'isheh, this is the fire offering, from the word aish, meaning fire, asher takrivu lashem, which you shall offer up to God. So you can see that this is a commandment to do this. Vasim b'nei shana, lambs of a year, yearling lambs. Tamim, pure, unblemished. Shnayim layom, 2 a day, 2 per day. Olah tamid, a perpetual olah, a perpetual um, offering, whole offering. We know we've come across the olah before, and essentially the entire animal was consumed. Parts of it on the altar, parts of it they were burnt off outside the camp in a pure place, and the skin would go, the hide would go to the priest to pay the priest, in a sense, for doing this. V'amarta lahem, you shall say to them. Who are you going to say? Who's the them here is what Rashi is responding to. And he says, Azara levetin. This is a warning to the betin. Warning is perhaps the wrong word here, but what it's basically saying is that they are responsible to make sure that this takes place. They bear the responsibility to make sure that the Kohanim are doing this. Shnaim layom, right? So here we go, 2 per day, but it could also be on the word la can mean for, right? So two for the day, for the sake of the day. So first of all, Rashi says 2 per day. That's a legitimate way to understand it. Keep shuto, just as it says. In other words, 2 lambs every day. The ikaro, but he says the real understanding underneath this, Ba'alelamed, this comes to teach, sheyu nishchatim keneged hayom, that they should be slaughtered uh, opposite the day. Tamid shel shachar, the morning tamid offering, b'ma'arav, in the west, v'shel bein ha'arbaim rachan, shel tabaot, and the evening tamid on the east side of the rings. Okay, so there were rings, and I believe we did do this the last time we met, but at any rate, There were rings that they used to secure the animals when they were being slaughtered. And since the sun comes up in the east, here we're offering the animal on the west side, etc. So that was the implication. And we find this in the Talmud and Tractate Yoma, page 62. Going on. Etakeves echad taseh baboker. So it's not that you bring two at the same time, but rather the one lamb you shall make in the morning. You shall prepare it in the morning. Ve'et hakeves hasheni taseh bein ha'arbayim. And the second lamb you shall do. It means between the evenings, but what it meant essentially was later in the afternoon. Later in the afternoon. So let's take a look at Rashi on this. Eta keves echad. Afal pi shekfar ne'amar. He says, even though this has already been stated, but Parshat va'atatza tetzaveh, all the way back in the book of Exodus, where we're talking about the dedication of the tabernacle of the Mishkan after its construction, right? This particular offering is mentioned back there, and this morning and evening is mentioned back there. It says, but in other words, back in Exodus chapter 29, where it says, and this is what you shall do, etc., and referring to this Tamid offering. He haita asara liyimei hamiluim. He says that is the instruction regarding the miluim, meaning the induction of the tabernacle, right? In other words, the setting up of the dedication of the tabernacle to start the process of the offerings. The kansiva ladorot, but here we now understand that it's for all subsequent generations. In other words, from that Exodus passage, we might have understood it to mean just during the time of the dedication of the tabernacle, but not necessarily beyond that. But here we're told this so that we understand that this is a daily practice and it isn't just tied to the dedication of the sanctuary of the Mishkan. Ba'asirit ha'efa solet lemincha, and along with this animal, there are other offerings that accompany it. 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, solet is fine flour, lemincha, as a meal offering. Blula v'shemen katit. So it is mixed in, this fine flour is mixed in with pounded oil. In other words, it's got to be like the first pressing of the olive oil. And it's not the absolute first pressing, but essentially it isn't from an olive press per se, even though I say that. This is done in a mortar and pestle, and it's the very beginnings of the extraction of the oil. So it's a very high purity level without a lot of what we'd call shmarim residue in the oil. And the way they would normally get rid of the residue is by filtration. But when you're just starting with the olive, and you're just starting to pound it, there is not a lot of residue. So how much of that oil? Revi'it hahin, 1/4 of a hin. So what I did was I checked to see if I could give you some modern equivalents of these amounts. So we mentioned an ephah, right? That's a dry measure, roughly equivalent to a bushel or 35 liters, and it says asirita ephah, 1/10 of an ephah. So in other words, 3.5 liters of fine flour, right? Okay, or 1/10 of a bushel. And the hin, which is mentioned, right? And they say it's roughly equal to 1.5 US gallons, which would be 5.7 liters. And it says revi'it, 1/4 of a hin. Right. So the notes that I found online were that authorities disagree on the exact capacity or hin. There has been obviously a great deal of study by various authorities to try to get a sense of what the equivalent is of these particular amounts, and there is not necessarily unity about all these various equivalents. So here we are. Excuse me, Rashi. Solet lemincha, fine flour for a meal offering. Minchat nesachim. So we call this the mincha, the meal offering of a nesech. A nesech is a libation, and that's because, of course, it's mixed with the oil, so that it's essentially a liquid as well. Olat tamid, a perpetual offering, ha'asuya bahar Sinai, that was originally performed at Mount Sinai. And of course, it was at Mount Sinai that they dedicated the tabernacle. So it's referring back to that. L'reach nechoach, of pleasing fragrance, Ishel Hashem, a fire offering to Hashem, to God. So Ha'asuya Bahar Sinai, right? So that was done at Mount Sinai. Ke'otan Shed Na'asu Bimei Hamiluim. So there we go. Rashi saying it's a reference to this Tamid offering, these two lambs that were brought when the tabernacle was dedicated, right? Yemei Hamiluim, that's a reference to the dedication of the tabernacle. Davar acher, another interpretation. Ha'asuya Bahar Sinai, that was done at Mount Sinai, performed at Mount Sinai. Hikish Ola Tamid. So what we're doing is we're connecting the perpetual offering, this Tamid offering, Le'olat Har Sinai, to the, it sounds to me like the ascension of Mount Sinai, right? So Ota Shenikrava Lifnei Matan Torah. So let's change that a little bit. So Olat here is referring to that Olah offering, that whole offering that was offered at Mount Sinai. In other words, why is that the reference to that particular Tamid? So we're connecting this Allah to the Olah that was performed at Mount Sinai during that dedication. Ota Shenikrava Lifnei Matan Torah, referring to that offering that was offered up before the giving of the Torah, Shekatuv Ba, with reference to which it states in Exodus chapter 24, Vayasim Ba'aganot, and he placed them in basins, Melamed Shetu'una Keli. And what this tells you is that one requires to perform this Tamid offering, and the libations, etc., have to be done with special vessels that were dedicated for the purpose. Excuse me, 1 second. I'm gonna pause a second here. Sorry, give me a second on this. Okay. Going on. Benisko, and again, and the nesech, this would be the wine libation. Revi'it hahin, a 1/4 of a hin. The keves ha'echad, for one lamb, in other words, each lamb, bakodesh, in the sacred place. So also revi'it hahin. Hasech nesek, you should set it up as a libation, shechar lashem, of strong, meaning alcoholic liquid for Hashem. So let's take a look at the Rashi on this. Venisko, referring to its wine libation. So wine, bakodesh, in the sacred place, hasech nesech, yeah. So hasech, you should set it up, al hamizbeach yitnasku. In other words, this needs to be poured out, because referring to the holy place is referring to the altar. That's the mizbeach. In other words, they should pour this wine out on the altar. And in fact, there was a special, I would say, orifice and channel for the wine to be poured down that, for it to go down. Nesech shechar, right? A libation of strong drink. Hamishaker. So the word shikor refers to a drunkard. Mishaker l'shaker is to intoxicate. So he's saying it has to be wine that is capable of intoxicating. It has to be alcoholic. Prat, which is to exclude, prat here means to exclude, la yayin migato, from wine from the vat. In other words, wine that hasn't had a chance to become alcoholic. So it has to be that. And of course, let's see if there's what else there is. Yes. Okay. Making sure I've got every verse here. Okay, here we go. Ve'et hakeves hasheni, and the second lamb, ta'aseh bein ha'arbaim, you shall perform that in the evening, right, or late afternoon. Kemin hataboker, according to the mincha of the morning. In other words, the accompanying libations, the fine flour, the oil, and the wine, all are exactly the same. Uchenisko, right? So in other words, just like the meal offering the morning and the libation of wine, ta'aseh, you shall do, you shall perform. Isher reich nichoach, a fire offering of pleasing odor, pleasing fragrance, Lashem, to God. So the question here, of course, is that God isn't a human being. Why are we talking about pleasing odor? So Rashi is telling us the Bible is using a metaphor, and it's called the pleasing fragrance, nachat ruach. That means enjoyment, right? Pleasure. The lefanai, before me, referring to God. In other words, it's as if God is saying, "This is giving me pleasure." Sha'amarti, because this is what I told you to do. V'ne'esa ritzoni, and my will is being performed. That is the Reach Nichoach. So anytime we try to practice divine will, in a sense, we're giving pleasure to God. And in a way, of course, it's connected to this sacrifice or the sacrifices that, again, are of pleasing fragrance before God. So, with the time I have, I just want to mention that this is so much like a meal, right? That when you think about it, you have the meat, and you have the fat, and you have the wine, and you have flour, and you have oil, etc. So that it's like preparing a meal. And of course, the altar is a table, and it occurred to me even many years ago that the meal is an amazing, has great spiritual, it also has great spiritual value and symbolism. And that is that, when you sit down to a meal, you are sharing in a very deep kind of way. So I took up cooking out of necessity, oh gosh, probably about 15 years ago. My wife was out of town, my family was out of town, I was living by myself. Excuse me. So I had to prepare food. Well, the short story is that I decided to invite people over to my home on Friday night and on Saturday after shul. And there were things that I learned about this on a spiritual level. One is that when you are fixing food and you're making it for people and they are ingesting your food, they're sitting around your table and ingesting the food that you have prepared, there's a great level of trust and love. And perhaps one of the greatest ways to share with someone else. And until I actually was doing this, I never realized it. On a lighter note, I would tell you that if I ever came up with a recipe book, because I'm not, I had a title for it, and the title was "You Can't Fake Seconds." And that is because if a person is going to take more, it's only because they've really enjoyed what they've eaten. So, at any rate, those are some of the spiritual connections. And that's one reason I think that the offerings and the sacrifices symbolize this deep trust uh, between the Jewish people and God. And again, the desire to express love in a very beautiful way, in this particular way. And if any of you want to comment, that's fine. Otherwise, I will end the session with this.